So I kind of wanted to go over a cookie cutter print I did with this. Mostly they came out pretty well and kind of came unstuck very well once it cooled down. There was one little issue, but this is more of a user error than the printer itself. I went to adjust something and the print head moved and knocked it, and I think that is what caused this issue to happen. So for the most part, it printed very well, and the only reason that happened is I wasn't familiar with it. So overall, these came out very well. They didn't really have any gaps in them. There was very, very minor stringing with it, which I think is fantastic for PETG, which is what I used for these. Like little bits, but I can get that off with my hands very well. But as you can see, like it looks amazing. It did a great job. Once again, just drag and drop these in there. I don't think I did anything to the settings actually. I just kind of dropped them in there and it did its job very well. And these ones are ones that I did on my Ender 3 Max, and they look okay, but they've got stringing, they've got little gaps here and there. They'd be usable, but I'd have to do a decent amount of cleanup work on them for me to want to use them. So it's not terrible, but there's less after work that I need to do with this, and it did it in about a third of the time. So doing very well so far as far as PETG is concerned. We'll try some more with it as we go. So here I'm going to go ahead and go over just dragging and dropping in the katana print. This one I kind of expected to fail just because of the way the print is and the speeds that it was going at. I thought it would have issues, which it did, and I'll cover here in a minute, but I just kind of did this one default settings to see what the printer was capable of with it, and it failed in a couple ways. One I expected and one not quite as much, but it makes sense when I think about it. You may see the time on it and then sending it directly to the printer. And then here it kind of switches over to, and if you look closely at it, you can actually see the insides moving, which I think caused a couple of the problems with it. Um, at first it's just kind of moving around on the inside, and you can kind of see each of the layers moving as it's touching and moving it, but it's still staying on track with them, which I think is pretty amazing with how fast it's going and what it's doing. But I think the vibrations really just kind of messed with it moving at that speed and having that narrow of a base. And then here you can see it just kind of started stringing, didn't really detect it. It moved off of the base, like it came off all right. And it didn't come out here. I had to use some pliers to actually pull it out when I did it. But it still held most of them for the most part. But I think the moving around also caused some fragility in the layer lines. And you'll see that here in a second where I show an overview of it once I had it pulled out. But some of them broke apart, some of them stuck together weirdly, so it did a lot better than I thought it would, especially with how it failed, but it still was a failed print. But it did pretty well despite how it failed, I think at least. So this was my first true fail on the printer as far as my prints go. Here's the second fail coming up. The roll actually came off a little bit. I think when it gets lighter like that, it kind of moves, but it doesn't really have a runout detection at the nozzle at least, because it was still partially in there. So I don't know if there's a runout in the AMS, which I'll be testing later. And then after that, I found there was a little piece stuck in there, so I ended up just kind of throwing that roll to the side. I'll try splicing it together and using it on my Ender 3 at some point for something small where I have to go in between them. You can see where that part was and close to where it failed. And then here is the successful katana. I did slow it down quite a bit to do it. I think everything was sub 100, but it came out very well. And the glue stick actually made it over stick, so I didn't get to show the entire part of me removing it from the build plate. I just kind of went around the edges a little bit more and it kind of popped out. But after that, I didn't need pliers or anything. It just kind of unsheathed itself the way it's supposed to, and it did an amazing job. No other settings were adjusted besides the speed for this. And then here's another one I did. I did the little fidget cube on a Thingiverse. And one of my other complaints is the SD card. I don't know why we can't get a USB connector or something like that, or even make it so it protrudes a little bit so people that don't have fingernails can get it out easily. But here's this one. I was actually able to pop it off on the video. Just kind of did a few flexes with it and maneuvered it a wee bit, and it was able to pop right off. And go ahead and show a quick comparison to another one that I did before. The other one is Pet G, but it turned out pretty well off of my Ender 3. And it just this took a lot less time. I didn't have to do any major settings to it. I literally drag, drop. The only thing I adjusted in settings this time was I enabled the time lapse. And it printed phenomenally. Like, there were no issues with it. I think I'm gonna hold off on making any more videos. These were just kind of the ones where I've done the same prints before and I could compare them. But if any troubles come up, I'll video those. And I want to say in a week or two, I'll go ahead and give a true first impression, not first impressions, but impressions of the printer overall. Mostly it's positive with little snafus here and there, but I will go ahead and summarize my thoughts a little bit better in my next video, and that hopefully won't be for another week or so, barring any major issues that come up with the printer.